own label, also owns Permanent Records Roadhouse Bar and Record Store. So this dude is like the person behind all music, I'm convinced. I'm so excited to talk to him. And also he puts out a really cool compilation called Brown Acid, really like psychedelic, fuzzy rock from the late 60s. So I'm so excited to talk to Lance today, and as always, ask questions in the comments. We love to hear from you. We love to hear what you guys are listening to, and let's see if Lance is here. All right. Hopefully the internet works for us today. It's different every time. Permanent Records declined. Okay. Let's try it again. Maybe I'll invite you guys. It's always dicey the first time. Hey, Lance.
Hey, Whitney, how are you?
Great. How are you doing?
Doing okay, as good as can be expected, I think.
Yes. Yeah. I always forget that question is really difficult to answer these days, but I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
And I'm so excited to talk to you. You have so many projects going at any given time. First of all, how's your quarantine been?
Busy, yeah. We pivoted super hard early on into mail order. So even though at the time of the pandemic hitting, we had a new live music venue slash record store called the Permanent Records Roadhouse that was only 5 months old. That was running, and we had obviously the record store, Permanent Records, going. And since then, it's all been, shuttered, and we've been focusing on mail order, which has helped us get through. It's not easy. It's a lot of extra work. We're doing it with just a fraction of the staff that we had before, but people are buying records still, and we have plenty of records. So yeah, we're doing all right.
Fortunately, now there's time for people to really sit at home and listen to records, which is one good side of this, and one thing that I've been really enjoying about this quarantine. I'm curious because the Permanent Records Instagram follows the same kind of format that a lot of actually vintage clothing stores that I follow do, where you'll post something, a record, and say first comment, dibs, gets it. I'm so curious about how you decide what to feature.
Yeah, I mean, from the get-go, we picked wall records at first. So we picked the most expensive and rare things that we had to offer, just because it seemed like the best way to go at first. And we didn't know, obviously, how long this was going to go on. So we wanted to kind of make each post count, you know? And then from there, it just became a game of, okay, grab the next best stuff, grab the next best stuff, and we just kind of blew through a bunch of stock from the store. And luckily, we've been able to buy a few collections from friends and regular customers, and people that follow us on Instagram. So we've been able to replenish our stock. So at this point, we're essentially just grabbing things as they come in and posting them for sale, because it's the new storefront. The Instagram account
Wow.
is the new storefront. So
Man, it makes me so happy to hear that, because we, especially here in LA, we get scared about brick and mortar stores closing all the time, and so especially because of COVID. So I'm so happy to hear that you guys are thriving and adapting. And it sounds like you've just been staying really busy.
for sure. Yeah, that's the only thing about this that makes it difficult. It's not that the sales aren't there, it's just the fact that to sell each record, you have to handle it and write a description for the caption, take a photo of it, and then after the dibs game, as it's been deemed, is over, the kind of coordination of all the orders and the organization of it to make sure that the right records go to the right people and that the payments come through and all that stuff. That's the hardest part, I think, is staying organized, you know.
Yeah, and that's brand new too. So I can't even imagine how crazy that is. I am so excited to talk with you about Brown Acid. It's something that is a relatively recent discovery for me, and it's so up my alley. I'm really into anything like fuzzy and doomy, and that's my psychedelic. That's all my shit. So I'm so excited to hear about how this came about. You just came up on your 10th album, and for the audience, just can you like get into how this started and and yeah, let's start there. How did you begin with Brown Acid?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I'm the owner of Permanent Records, so I've had a store for going on 14 years now, and I've been a collector, since way before that as well. So that's kind of how it got going, like just having a record store and being surrounded by records always kind of like put you in the mindset of how can I like organize this particular thing and like make it make sense, and there's been historically plenty of compilations of all sorts of different kinds of music, from rare punk to garage, soul, funk, etc. And as I started getting more and more into the deeper, like rarer private press, heavy rock 45s, it seemed really obvious to me that this particular subgenre wasn't really being given the kind of love that garage especially has been given over the years. Like ever since Nuggets came out, there's been Pebbles and Boulders and you name it, you know, limitless amounts of garage rock comps, and there's a little bit of crossover with Brown Acid and that stuff, but a lot of the heavier stuff just kind of got put on random comps if it was comped at all. So that was kind of the impetus. Uh, that and also I DJ'd for 6 years every Wednesday night at a bar called the Black Boar, and it was like always hard and heavy rock and roll, a lot of psych and stuff. And every night, or every Wednesday, I would make mixtapes, or I would just tape the sets of mine and the guest DJs. And at some point, somebody asked me if I was selling those tapes, those mixes at the shop. And I was like, man, that's a great idea. And I would love
Yeah.
to do that. But I never felt right about it because as the person who is putting those tapes together and the person who owns the record store, I never wanted to like take the uh, liberties with somebody else's music. I'm a big fan of giving credit where credit's due. Bootlegs are a part of the used record world in general, but you can't really put your name on something like that because it's risky and it's just wrong.
Yeah.
So I started thinking of ways that I could put those mixtapes out into the world all while being totally legit about it. And that's where Daniel and Writing Easy Records came in, and they were into the tracks that I was compiling. And the last step was just tracking the members from those bands and getting their permission to be able to re-release their music.
I imagine that's got to be pretty difficult because a lot of what Brown Acid's sort of brand is putting out stuff that you can't find anywhere else. So how does that process go trying to track down? I'm sure that some of these bands aren't even like a thing anymore.
Oh, definitely not. For the most part, you'd be surprised. Like about 1 in 50 bands that I'm trying to track just has a website. So like
Wow.
Sweet Crystal, for
Great.
instance, yeah, has just like you can go to sweetcrystal.com or whatever their band website is, and they were super easy to contact and really, really like stoked to have their music be re-released into the world.
Cool.
But yeah, and unfortunately, those cases are few and far between. A lot of the people that were in bands back in the late 60s and early 70s um, don't are old. They're older guys. They're in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and they're not savvy with technology. Some of them don't have cell phones, much less Instagram or whatever. So you have to just cold call people sometimes. Whitepages.com has been a good resource over the years, and anywhere from straight up being able to contact someone via their website of the band that still is an ongoing concern from them, to cold calling someone who hasn't even thought about their band from 1971 since they broke up in 1971. It runs the gamut for sure.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
sure. So when we talk about brown acid, it looks like we're looking primarily at this in between period between the hippie music of the early 60s, it's the sort of like sweet spot between the late 60s and the early 70s before punk was really a thing. And I'm curious why you think this era is so often overlooked.
That's a very good question. I think it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I think it's in an in between the cracks kind of subgenre that isn't like super easy to define, you know? And also some of the nomenclature that gets applied to the kinds of records that I've compiled on Brown Acid is really misleading. So people will call those records heavy metal or they'll call them hard rock, and hard rock can mean a lot of different things. It can mean Van Halen, or it could mean Guns N' Roses. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So I think people, especially record collectors and people who, compile things and try to organize them into neat little subgenres, garage is really easy generally, and there's a lot of it, and there's a lot of punk rock, and the stuff in between, it, for whatever reason, just didn't appeal to a wide enough audience of collectors or curators to like have it be a thing until pretty recently. Of course, there's plenty of psych comps, but psych can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It can be really kind of airy, like beautiful poppy psychedelic music, or it can be like super crunchy, acid tinge, like, nightmares even.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to like kind of describe exactly what the genre is for a lot of people, but I think brown acid maybe not perfect, but kind of puts everything under a really great umbrella for people like you and I who have similar taste and like hard stuff from the late 60s and early 70s.
Yeah. Well, then I ask, what defines something that is going to make it, because it's such a it's such a wide net, and I know, having listened to the albums, the kind of vibe, but I'm curious about what makes it onto a brown acid compilation and what doesn't. What is the sort of standard?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to kind of really kind of pinpoint, and I think that gets back to the previous point of it being a difficult thing to say this is brown acid material and this isn't, because there's, a fine line between a record that came out in 1974 that may not be especially heavy, but has a certain je ne sais quoi, if you will, that separates it from a record that came out like 2 or 3 years later. 76 and 74 have like very different production values, but that can also kind of change depending on the region that the record or the band is from, because some more rural areas are a little bit behind the times as far as like being stylistically trendy or up to date or whatever. So you can find a record that fits the vibe that came out in the late 70s or almost even into the early 80s, because some of these bands uh, wrote some of these songs in the early 70s and then didn't even record until 5 or 6 years later.
Wow.
So you have a song that sometimes you'll have a song that was written in, 1972 that didn't come out until 1977, and that's why it works, even though it kind of falls out of the 68 to 74 time frame.
Yeah,
Um,
interesting. Huh.
yeah,
Now
and
I'm
it's
curious. Is rarity, does that play like a really big role in what you decide to put on a compilation at the end of the day?
no, not at all,
Really?
actually. One of the records, oh, Barnes, Johnny Barnes, shoot. Oh yeah, Steel Rail Blues, I think is the name of the song. That you can buy that record on Discogs right now for like $2.
Wow.
But it's not common. It's not something you'll like wander into a used record store and just find with ease. It's just, not rare. And I love that track. I think it's great. It's a little on the late side, but he talks about smoking reefer and drinking wine, and it just fits the vibe.
Yes.
And so when you can find things that work like that aren't rare, I love that kind of stuff because that means that the original records are accessible for me, but also accessible for anybody else who's trying to kind of use a compilation as a checklist to acquire the original 45s. Rarity, I think, is only a factor because we're dealing with, generally speaking, mostly private press records or records that were issued in minute quantities, mostly as promotional items or kind of like a resume for a band to give to promoters or people who ran record labels back in the day, you know, almost a demo. And so therefore, when something was released in a quantity of 500 or less over the 40 or so years that have passed since it came out, those things have been kind of spread around the world and are harder to find than a needle in a haystack now. And all it takes is 501 people to want that thing to make it collectible and make it valuable the way that like a peace pipe 45 is, which is one from Brown Acid that's worth 800-ish dollars.
Wow. Now, you just touched on something that I've also seen echoed in a lot of the interviews that you've done, that you really are ambitious about making things accessible to people. And I think with really intense subgenre stuff and sometimes the LA hard music community, there can be a lot of gatekeeping. Also, speaking as a woman, and it's so refreshing to hear someone who has such a breadth of work as you do be so passionate about making things accessible and making things not gate kept. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. I mean, as someone who's, when I use the term DJ, I use it very loosely. I'm not, beat matching or doing anything, specifically. I'm not engaging in turntablism. I'm just playing records one after another and just kind of blending them seamlessly. And DJs, historically have a reputation for being very protective over the records that they're playing so that, other DJs don't just cop their whole vibe and, go do what they're doing and like kind of steal their personality, if you will. But we live in an age of information sharing in general, and to hide things from people at this point seems pretty silly because if you're playing a record that's on a major label, the chances of you being able to Shazam it or whatever at a bar are pretty good. So it seems pretty
Okay.
silly to be that way anymore, especially considering the wealth of information that's available on the internet with you don't even have to put much effort into figuring it out. There's YouTube channels of hundreds or thousands of tracks all under the same umbrella that you can just go kind of click around on super easily and like get super deep with.
Yeah.
But the
Yeah, what's the point
difference,
of being gatekeeping if you can find it easily anyways?
totally, yeah, for sure. And the difference between, being a YouTube channel and a curator of a compilation is that I'm putting the effort into getting the permission from the artist and making sure that the artists are paid for their work. So that they get a fraction of what they should have gotten in the first place. But a lot of what goes into bands becoming successful or famous, which rarely happens, is luck. The right place at the right time. You can be the best band ever, and be in the wrong place at the wrong time and just have bad luck or mismanagement, and you will lose your opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
I gotta
so
ask, do you have a favorite album? Do you have a favorite Brown Acid compilation?
I've been asked that a lot of different times, and I don't. I love them all equally. And one of the reasons for that is that I have to actually put the effort into tracking all the bands that we include on the compilations. So I don't go after things that I don't really like because sometimes it can be hours of work. And sometimes you just hit a brick wall and a track that you're trying to license just becomes completely unattainable, you know? And so for every track that we've actually been able to release on the compilation series, there's dozens where either there's nobody's name on the physical 45 and no information to be gleaned at all to be able to track a band member, and or I've gotten a hold of people that are just like, thank you so much for your interest, but I'm not interested. I'm a born again Christian now, and the psychedelic 45 I put out in 1969 like doesn't reflect my worldview anymore, you know, and I'd really
Wow.
rather not have that out in the world. So the response is generally really positive, but there's for sure a lot of different reasons why certain things can't be licensed.
Yes.
And yeah, and that's what I was saying is that's the hardest part of doing a compilation series where everything is legit, is getting people's permission and only using tracks that we've gotten the rights to.
Now
But
I'm
what's
curious because you
yeah.
have a record store and bar too. So would somebody like me, when Los Angeles is done with all of this shit, when I'm finally able to come and visit the Roadhouse Bar, is that the opportunity that I would get to hear maybe some of the songs that aren't able to end up in the in like the compilations?
Yeah, of course.
Cool.
I do pretty much a little bit of everything at the bar. And one of the things that I do is I run sound for most of the shows. And if the bands that are playing, like for instance, when Zigzags and The Well played at the Roadhouse a month or so before we closed, I DJ'd before the bands and in between the band sets and stuff. And those are all just records from my collection that, you know, I just like whether I've been able to license them or not. So since I don't have a weekly DJ gig at another bar anymore, I try to DJ as much as I can, as much as it makes sense to at my own place now, you know. So yeah, I love it. It's great. That's one of the worst parts about this whole scenario is not being able to have live shows and also not being able to play, you know, records from my collection uh, for friends. You know,
Yeah.
that was the best part about having a weekly DJ night for 6 years is just sharing the records that you've most recently acquired that you're excited about and things that you haven't played in weeks or months or years that have, you know, just accumulated. So.
Have you considered doing streams like on Twitch or any kind of live DJ stuff online? Because I would absolutely tune into that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've been so busy with the mail order thing and just trying to keep Permanent afloat that DJing has definitely taken a back seat. However, one of the supervisors at Permanent, Miguel is his name, he does a monthly DJ night, or did a monthly show night called Permanent Psych Nights, and he has been over the course of the last few Fridays been DJing and streaming it live on our Instagram stories.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I have to ask, you look so much like a DJ that I saw at, there's a barcade downtown. I think it's called Bar 82. And have you ever DJed there?
No, I haven't.
Okay, there's a guy that looked just like you, and also his DJ set was he just put on the entirety of Dope Smoker by Sleep, and so I was like, maybe there's a connect there. I'm always happy to hear that in its entirety. Since we're talking about the bar, and you mentioned a little bit of the musical guests that you've had, I know that you guys were pretty new once all of this stuff locked down. But can you speak on some of the musical guests that you featured and who you hope to have?
Oh, I I don't know if I should say this, but I might as well. I was really looking forward to a show we had planned for, I think it was June, what was it going to be? May 22nd or something. Earthless was planning on coming up to play the Roadhouse. Yeah,
Got
been
it.
I've been a fan of theirs for a long, long time, and you know I've developed a friendship with Mario Rubalcaba, and he was kind enough to, you know, offer to come play the Roadhouse once we had things rolling. And it, you know, it takes a long time to get, you know, a show like that booked, especially when you're in a venue the size that we were. Our capacity is just 100 people. So for a band like Earthless, it would have been a really intimate, special event. So yeah, that was one of the hardest, the toughest pills to swallow, is to see that date come and
Damn.
go on the calendar, you know? But there's tons of great bands. We've hosted a bunch of awesome shows already. Like I said, Zigzags in the Well was one of my favorites. We had Flatworms play. Oh man, so many good bands, and I'm spacing right now. I wasn't thinking about this. And it feels like it's been forever, you know? It's
Yeah, it has. It's been almost the amount of time that you guys have been open. It's been 4 months, so
yeah.
crazy, crazy,
We,
crazy. I'm
we,
so ready for all this to be over. Yeah, I looking at you guys, and for those watching, there's so many cool interviews with you where you really go into detail about some of the bands that you featured. Oh no, Lance, are you frozen? Okay, there you go. But I also like, so everybody sort of look at the Permanent Records Instagram, and like you'll find all the kinds of bands that come in and out. But also, on top of managing several record stores over several years and putting out Brown Acid, Permanent is also a label. And so I have no idea how you have time to do this during the day or like in your life. But can you tell me a little bit about the kinds of bands that Permanent features on its label?
Sure, yeah. So we started the record label almost immediately after starting the store in Chicago back in 2006, to put out a record by a band called Warhammer 48K, which was a band from Columbia, Missouri, which is where I went to college, that was one of the best local bands in Columbia and was like kind of on the rise at that time. The Corey Rusk from Touch and Go was expressing interest in putting out their next LP and stuff. And then unfortunately the band split up. But that's how we got rolling with the label. The band had issued their record on CD, but they hadn't done vinyl yet. So we pressed 1,000 copies of their LP right before they broke up. So
Damn it.
off
So
to a
what, are
great
those just
start.
in limbo now? Or are they gonna
They were
oh,
for a long time, but we did end up selling through them eventually. But one of the best, the only maybe good part about a band breaking up is that oftentimes the people that were in that great band splinter into a bunch of other cool bands. And one of the bands that came out of the ashes of Warhammer 48K was Cave. And Cave is like kind of a modern um neo krautrock band, I guess you could say. Just like crazy motor, a lot of repetition. They got heavy at times, and you know, just super psychedelic. Really,
hell
really
yeah.
great.
Now, you've done
Um,
also a lot of work in Chicago. I'm curious, can you compare the Chicago music scene to Los Angeles? How do they differ?
oh wow, like wildly.
Really?
Yeah, the music scene, especially when I was living there, and granted, I haven't lived in Chicago since 2011, so that's when my kind of time frame ends. But that said, the scene in Chicago is really, really centered around a lot of really small DIY kind of loft space venues.
Mm.
So unlike in LA, where most, I would say, there's a few exceptions, of course, most of the venues are legit, and most of them are bars and commercial kind of interests. DIY spaces in Chicago were kind of lawless and like pretty dangerous, to be honest, but like that kind of lent itself to a lot of really experimental music on from all different genres. So there were like weird punk bands, a lot of noise music, etc. So that said, I think Chicago in general is just like a more aggressive kind of in your face, intense kind of city to live in, and I think the local music scene there reflects that.
Hmm.
But it was also a really cool place to live and see shows because the like whatever pop punk band would play with like a thrash metal band and like a noise band would headline or something, you know? So
Amazing.
it was more centered around community and like friendship, I think, than it was like stylistically making the bill kind of like samey,
Mm,
which I thought was really cool. I really like going to shows where the bands don't all sound exactly the same, you know?
yeah.
But since I've lived in, when I first moved to LA, I was a little disappointed, to be honest, because Chicago was so rich. The local music community was so rich. Um, it seemed a little bit, it's really, the sprawl is real here.
Yeah.
So the getting to shows, you can't just hop on your bike and like, you know, ride for a mile and go to three different venues, all of which are BYO and like, you know, have a $5 cover or whatever. Like if you want to go to a show here, you like pretty much have to get in a car, and or if you want to go from one show to another, you also need to drive, you know. um, and so it didn't feel as connected, you know. But since 2011, I think the local music community here has, you know, we've gained a lot of amazing artists from other towns, like a lot of Bay Area bands like the OCs and Ty Segall and
Yeah. I'm
you know,
from the Bay,
Michael
so I'm
Trent.
always happy about that.
Yeah, all of those people have moved here or moved back here since I moved here, and now it's incredible. I love the local music scene here. I think it's getting more and more diverse. Venues like Zebulon opening have been a total game changer for the music community. They're bringing stuff that I would have never thought there was an audience for when I first moved here. And they're selling out shows with, you know, free jazz concerts and stuff.
Yeah.
It's like pretty incredible to see how the local music community has developed here. And I think it's getting just better and better all the time.
I agree, and hopefully when we make our triumphant return to being able to go out, it'll continue getting better and better. I have to ask you this. I know this is probably a question you get all the time, and I'm sure it's not an easy one to answer, but I have to. What is your most treasured record? Actually, I'll give you a top couple, whichever, because I'm sure
Wow.
you have a lot.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And again, I have so many records that it's very hard to pick a most treasured record. Um, wow. Really putting me on the spot. Well, um, I'd say let's change the question just slightly so I don't have to pick a favorite. I can pick maybe a a really hard to find one or something
Yeah,
like that.
great, love it.
Um, yeah. And now I'm blanking on the title, but I own a Ciampi 45, which if you haven't heard of them, I couldn't license the track for Brown Acid because another label owns the rights. But they're a Texas band and their music's incredible. They're super crunchy, early 70s hard rock. And they've been, I don't think this is necessarily true, but they've been deemed the Black Sabbath from Texas. Um,
Whoa.
and and I own Lay on the Floor by Ciampi, which is a really, really amazing 45, and I consider myself lucky to own for sure.
I have to check that
Um,
out. That's awesome.
yeah, SEOMPI, Ciampi. Amazing band for sure. Um, Rockadelic Records did an LP compilation. They have a handful of 45s and a bunch of unreleased material that's been compiled in the past. I don't think much of it is readily available on vinyl right now, but it's great. And that's one of my prized possessions for sure.
Man, it's so cool to see that you marry what is as clearly a huge dedication to unearthing gems with also this incredible ethic that you have to really make sure that artists get credit, which is, you know, something that the music industry doesn't always represent. And so I really enjoyed speaking with you. Your story is so, so interesting. I cannot wait. This is the thing that's gonna make me wish we were out of quarantine the most is so that I can go to the bar and hang with you guys. We're almost out of time, but here at Tower Records, we have a saying that is no music, no life, and I would love to know what that means to you.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, my entire day is filled with music from the moment I wake up till the moment I pass out at night, and it's in my dreams. So to me, music is life for sure, and I can't imagine, I don't even really think I'd want to live a life where I couldn't have music on. Silence feels like death to me, for real. Um, it's a weird scenario to be a person who has worked at a record store, my own, for almost 15 years, and for years beyond that as well, and to leave the store and go home and immediately want to put on a record. I think is proof that I can't live without it. It's it's more important than just about anything else I can think of. And it
Thank you, Lance.
makes good times better, and it makes good and bad times better. And I can't imagine living without it right now.
That actually, I'm going to get you one more question because you just reminded me of something that I love to ask musicians and anyone that comes on this show, which is I remember hearing a long time ago that you either listen to music to enhance and affirm your current mental state or to change it. And I would love to know what you listen to more of.
Oh wow. I don't ever feel like I need to change my current mental state. I'm generally like pretty stoked on what I do every day, so it's always an enhancement. It's really I wake up every day and I'm excited to listen to music that I already know and love, but to also discover new things. And the depth of the well that is all music is incredible, and it's exciting, and it's reason enough to get up every single day, no matter what's going on in your life, to know that you will never be able to hear all the music, but it's uh, an adventure to try to hear as much as possible.
Hell yeah. Lance, you have been such a delight. Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody go and give Permanent Records a follow. It's so, so clear